Welcome to this week's edition of Military Trailblazer Office Hours. Thank you for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here in the spirit of community, mentorship, and learning. I am your host, Geralyn Hall. I'm a Salesforce customer success professional and a military trailblazer. Each week, we invite a co-host or co-hosts, in this case, 7 amazing co-hosts, to take part in the conversation so that we can leverage their experience, expertise, and unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is the importance and practical application of data security. So if you've ever wondered why you should incorporate data security into designing and building Salesforce solutions and how to go about doing that, this is the session for you. I'd like to welcome and briefly introduce our co-host panel for tonight's session: Cece Adams, Joseph Bava, Adam Best, Chris Steinhammer, Fiona Kelly, Laura Pelkey, and LeeAnne Rimel. Cece is a solution architect at Salesforce. She is 20 times, yes, that is correct, 20 times Salesforce certified and has deep industry experience in customer service, business analysis, and platform development. Cece is a New York Army National Guard veteran serving as a paralegal. Joseph is a threat and vulnerability engineer at Salesforce. He's an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserves and also volunteers as the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs for the City of San Francisco, advising the mayor on workforce policy and program matters. Adam is a senior program architect at Salesforce. He has nearly 15 years of Salesforce experience, delivering small and large-scale Salesforce transformations across multiple industries, and is a Salesforce platform and DevOps security subject matter expert. Chris is a solution architect at Salesforce. He's been in the CRM industry for 15 years with experience in product management, sales operations, program development, and consulting. Chris is a coach, mentor, and teacher, and is passionate about developing others. Fiona is a solution architect at Salesforce. She has over 10 years experience as a system admin, business analyst, developer, and an architect. She has worked in every area of information technology, and as an architect, she has worked as a data architect, solution architect, and enterprise architect. Fiona served in the U.S. Army as a signals intelligence analyst and as an information assurance security officer. Laura is a senior manager of customer security awareness at Salesforce. She's been with Salesforce for over 6 years and has deep experience in security awareness and customer education. She often presents about security at Dreamforce and TDX. Laura also has previous experience as a CRM administrator and as a marketer. LeeAnne is the Senior Director of Admin and Developer Product Evangelism. She's been with Salesforce for almost 14 years, working in numerous sales engineer and product-related roles. She's passionate about building and presenting, frequently contributing to Salesforce learning content. It is so great to have you all co-host our office hours with me. Welcome. And oh my goodness, I should have counted how many years of experience together you all have, but it is a lot. It's probably well over 100 years of experience. So it's so great having you all here with me today. So I'd like to go over the session purpose for those that may be joining the first time. I always like to briefly explain the purpose of these office hours before we open up the floor for questions and discussion. These sessions are an informal get-together for gathering with military trailblazers and allies to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding-related topics to help you achieve your professional development and career-related goals. The next hour is intended to be an opportunity for collaborative mentorship. Everyone on this call is encouraged to step up and help answer questions from your perspective, which will help provide additional diversity of experience to the answers given. Please also keep an eye on the chat window during tonight's session. I and others on this call share a lot of great information there, including learning, networking, and employment opportunities. If you'd like to ask a question at any point during today's session, please feel free to do so. If you don't feel as comfortable speaking up, you can also post your questions in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor the chat window, and also we'll be looking for raised hands. Finally, tonight's session is being recorded. So if you'd like to share an attribution-free comment, please let me know before speaking, and I'll make sure that it's edited out of the final recording. So we'll go ahead and we'll jump right in for our star-studded panel. Before we dive into how to design for and implement data security, let's set the context by discussing what data security is. How would you define data security as it relates to designing and creating solutions for the Salesforce platform? Okay, Fiona, it looks like you want to go first. Go ahead.
I don't step on anybody. I think it's really contextual. It is the way a customer decides their information is important and vulnerable, both internally and externally. There are external uses for data that define its security, and then there are internal uses as well. So it's really situationally defined. It's one of the first things in any project that we determine is what is the data, and where is it a threat? Where is it changed where it shouldn't be? Where is it accessed where it shouldn't be, internally and externally?
To jump off of that, when I think of data security, compliance always comes up. It's one of the honestly top things it really should be if it's not in your project, because in addition to making sure that you're following your own policies, there's governmental policies that you have to make sure you're covering as well.
When you're thinking about your implementation, I think those are two really great answers. Something that I always like to keep in mind and layer on top is it's both intentional and unintended manipulation or access of your data, right? Or of your organization. So often, I think it's often most interesting to talk about like threat actors and just, that's often where we think about data security and where we put a lot of our energy in, but it's both, intentional and unintentional manipulation of data that's unauthorized or shouldn't happen. So I think that when you're adopting a great data security approach, it can, of course, both keep you compliant, keep your organization secure, but also hopefully prevent well-intended users from potentially making mistakes in your environment as well.
Is anybody just allowed to talk about data security on here?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone's encouraged to speak up, put their perspective in. Absolutely.
Well, we're talking about like data security, but also your physical security. So your OPSEC, your PERSEC, anything that's going to influence not just like how you're storing it, but where you're storing it, who has access to it, who has physical access to the computers that you have. My background has been mostly working in a SCIF or on like networks that are closed. So my first thought is, red and black. Where is your security going? Who has access, and who has access to the locations of your data, not just in the cloud, but physically can get to your sources.
Yeah, that's a great point. Adam, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Geralyn. Megan, that was a really good point, and it reminded me to, mention from a Salesforce perspective, we all think about security controls around production Salesforce or your production org. What about security controls around your non-production orgs that have production data or production-like data that's not unmasked? So think about the application lifecycle management. Because cybersecurity teams, and we're working the Salesforce industry, we will work with our organization's cybersecurity team on what controls and regulations that we have to look at. So we're almost ambassadors for letting our cybersecurity teams know exactly what authorization and authentication means on the Salesforce platform, so that they can help us comply with their either government regulations or company policies. So that spans across any org or sandbox that has production-like data.
Great. So Laura, we'll go with you next, and then Mary, we'll get your question after Laura.
Thank you. So I've heard access talked about by a few people. And to me, Salesforce is used to store an incredible amount of valuable data. And securing that data is really, to me, when we're talking about from the inside and from your users and even from the outside, applying the principle of least privilege and assigning the correct level of permissions. And that's kind of like, a very basic, simple principle that I think gets overlooked a lot of the time, but something that can really help you set yourself up for success when it comes to security.
That's a great point, Laura. Mary, you had a question or a comment to add.
It's not so much a question as a point that it's something sometimes as simple and as basic as don't share usernames and passwords. Orgs that have been around for a while or that basically haven't had a Salesforce professional may sometimes get into the habit of saying, what the heck, we'll share our username and password. And it'll also save us costs on licenses. But there's also the issue, the prior person spoke about data. One of the things that, he runs the Dashboard Dojo. His name is Dave Carnes. He said one of the things that's one of the biggest Salesforce security holes that Salesforce doesn't really talk about is the ability to export spreadsheets of any time, reports of any size. You can literally export an entire company's data. And if you've checked off the box saying, allow reports to be exported, that basically opens it to everybody in that profile. So people can walk off with your data as they're going out the door. And unless you've got like a program, like a separate Salesforce program like Shield, you're not really going to know if they did or not. If they walked off with your data and went to a customer. So.
Yeah, Mary, that is the perfect segue into my next question for our panel. So I'd like to shift the focus to the importance of data security and ask why it's integral to enabling the success of our customers. So in other words, for those entering into Salesforce ecosystem roles, why should they become data security experts?
Actually, I think it was LeeAnne's point earlier, I've worked in locations where data security there wasn't really an internal data governance model, let alone a data security model. And I think a lot of companies, particularly startup companies, have a tendency to have a very open data model. And what they don't understand or don't have the experience in is really that unintentional change. So, we all know there's people coming in, they're trying to take your competitive business intelligence, they're trying to take secure, PII, all these sorts of forms of active threat, but that internal threat, which was really unintentional, well-meaning, oopsies. I didn't mean to walk away with all that data. I didn't mean to create that report that's now living on my desktop on my personal computer. I think it's not necessarily an intent to restrict or punish anyone, but having that data security model, it keeps your customers safe. It keeps you safe. It ensures that changes that are made go through a process. It ensures that we understand what is in place and how these processes get us from point one, to whatever it is on the other end. I think security, starting any program or going into any position and understanding what that security model is, really governs how all the processes should work too. It's really the most fundamental step in any project.
Imagine you were logging into your expense reporting tool. Like, let's say a lot of us probably have to do some sort of expense reporting or some sort of documentation like that at work. And you're logging in and you probably skip past the how-to documentation because you're like, it's an expense reporting tool. I'll just figure it out. That's fine. I'm just going to click around until I can get my receipt added. And then you clicked on the wrong button. Even though it was documented somewhere, you had the perms to click on the button and you deleted your colleague's expense report. and you wouldn't say that was my, I mean, you might say that's my fault, but you also would be like, why did I have access to do that? That's a bad UI. So I think like fundamentally for Salesforce admins, developers, architects, like good security goes hand in hand with a good UI. Like you don't want your users to be tiptoeing around your environment like, oh my gosh, I'm going to break everything. Like you should try to make it kind of padded walls for your users. Like they shouldn't be able to break things that easily in your environment. And then, so I think to be good at your role in the Salesforce ecosystem, I think having good data practices, good security practices, it goes hand in hand with just building a good environment for your users. I would also say there's great career opportunity to expand and build on your role. And if that's, you know, as you think about your career roadmaps, I think there's great opportunity. And I know, like, I think Laura has some great points about this. Like, there's some great opportunities for Salesforce developers, Salesforce admins, Salesforce architects to partner with your security organization, to partner with IT, to partner with, you know, your team that does like phishing testing and all of that. Like, I think there's a wonderful chance to expand your role and to develop more deep internal partnerships to serve the needs of your business. So it's a good career opportunity as well.
Awesome. Cece, you want to go next and then Adam?
Yes, I will. So another reason that I think it's really good to know about data security, definitely at least go through the trails, is because just for your own knowledge, it's good to know, have that foundation of information so that when you're in a situation where maybe you're talking to a client and they're saying, well, you know, everyone should be able to see everyone's salary, that you can push back on those requests and requirements that they have and make sure that you're helping them make the best decision based on not just best practices, but for their business as overall. I've come across situations where sometimes you can see something that you shouldn't be able to see, not just take the actions, but maybe you're just able to see information that you shouldn't be. And as I'm delving more into Health Cloud, for example, you know, the more you know about data security, the more you're able to make sure that you're asking those correct questions so that the client's covered, because there may be things that they're not thinking of as well.
Adam, you're up.
Very true. Thanks, Geralyn. And I just wanted to, you know, remind everyone, I think it's everyone's responsibility for security. So if you're an admin, you're responsible for that org. So you're going to be the data steward of that org. So it's really up to you. A cybersecurity team will help you comply, but there's the ambassador of the org is usually the system administrator. Okay, so you really need to be probably the expert of your data model and make sure that any new changes coming into the org are going to have the principle of least privilege and be right for the user base. I guess the second group of people are the change makers, the trailblazers. And so if you're a solution architect or a technical architect, then having a good persona strategy, persona meaning I'm a business user, maybe a service agent, and I've got a particular role, profile, permission set group, and feature-based permission sets to support just the principle of least privilege. Then having those particular business users designed principle of least privilege, not having export reports if you don't need to have reporting, because data theft could be a business user downloading all contacts in the org. That's a security breach. And I also want to remind everyone across the principle of least privilege around your integration users as well. So every org now, Salesforce just launched, every org has up to five integration users free. So there's no excuse now. You can break apart that one integration user and look at the particular permissions that is needed for your ESB, like MuleSoft, or your event monitoring, like New Relic. So you can break apart those permissions now, principle of least privilege. And of course, if you need more than five, the integration users can be purchased from your account executive.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that just came out right at the True to the Core. Yeah, I always
Yeah.
like watching those sessions because there's some great information you can get out of there, and you can really see that Salesforce is listening to its customers and taking the feedback from trailblazers like you, and actually implementing some of these changes. So always a great session to watch. If you're not able to catch it live, you can always go back and see if it's recorded on Salesforce Plus. Elio, did you have a question or a comment?
I have just a quick comment. I want to thank and a question. The panel today, great discussion, and just recently we had a gentleman in the military who broke security protocol. Right, he had access to systems as an IT person and took data out of there, but having the right policies will allow the government to find out who that person was. So, like the panel has mentioned, security goes down to every individual in the organization. It's not just the IT. It's not just a security officer. I'm working on the sharing and visibility architect exam, which I'm taking this week. And so I couldn't wait to get on the call and hear people's take on this. But I'm glad that you're pointing out to the panelists the importance of everybody's role in an organization, right? From an individual that's a user all the way down to an admin and to an architect. And for us in the Salesforce space, this is a great opportunity to enhance our roles. So I just wanted to make that point to the folks. And again, thank you everybody for your insight today.
Fiona. Oh, and Elio, good luck. Good luck. Keep us posted. Fingers crossed for you. Fiona, did you have a comment?
Yeah. First, good luck. Good luck. Best of luck to you. I kind of wanted to build on something that both Elio and Adam had brought up, which is integrations, and an enterprise master data management strategy is just as important in data security as having your policies in place, because I really think it helps you to understand what your data actually is, what it means, and thus how impactful it is. And using tools like MuleSoft or other master data management tools really allows you to have those sort of enact those policies enterprise-wide, which I think a problem that we face in our really interconnected environments now is that we have these silos of policies in systems and we don't really necessarily see them at that high level, which can create a gap in understanding. So really having that master data management policy strategy and implementation, along with, principle of least privilege on your integration users, et cetera, I think is really, really critical in ensuring your enterprise-wide security. So I just wanted to bring that up as an additional point.
Thank you, Laura. And then I'll give you all another question, try and stump you all, although I don't think that's going to be too easy.
Yeah, this is just in reference, I think, to something Adam had said earlier, and a couple people have touched on. Salesforce admins and developers and kind of hybrid roles are really the stewards of the data, and it's really their responsibility and kind of the first line of defense when it comes to security. And there are, there's the usability issue where you want things to be easy for your users and you want people to not be able to make mistakes, like LeeAnne said, that might affect security. And then there's also really the larger implications, which are, when you don't have security, you don't have trust with your customers. And so, there's a lot of things that can impact your brand in your customers' eyes, and really security being lacking is one of the top things. And so just from like a macro level, you really want to make sure that, as someone that has a lot of responsibility in that arena, that you're really considering how to uphold your customers' trust whenever possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you all know this working at Salesforce, and I'm sure that the Trailblazers on the call have heard this, that trust is, our number one thing at Salesforce. So I think it's great that you brought that up and highlighted that, Laura. So I want to ask, as leaders, how do you enable a culture of security within your internal teams and with your customers? So how do you allow people to be able to feel comfortable stepping up and saying if they see something that maybe looks like it might be causing an issue? And Joseph, we will start with you.
So I've been oddly silent during this because a lot of the stuff everybody's talked about is on the front end of the application. However, I work on the super not really talked about back end of Salesforce. So as of like a week ago, I was in a one-on-one with my boss, and we kind of went over how many virtual or physical hosts does Salesforce have that my team is responsible for. It's 1.2 million hosts. And I don't think that included GovCloud, which is even more. So when it comes to that, how do you do that? So lucky for me, my boss and the other bosses I've had here, we do what's called like servant leadership. So there's no way I could get away with the amount of scanning and the amount of issues that we have if I didn't feel confident in going to my boss, because stuff breaks. We have incidents. I get personally paged a lot at like midnight. Hey, can you solve this? And sometimes it's important, sometimes not so much. So when there are those times and I see something wrong, if I'm too scared or too afraid to go to my boss about something that I've seen, and that happens more often than we like to admit, then what happens? That fear perpetuates and the security gap gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when there's a legit massive incident, well, we're kind of screwed. And then that's when everybody else on the call gets blown up by their customers. That happens in every incident that makes the news. If a big enough vulnerability gets released to the world, our customers will come to us. They'll go to customer success, their SEs. Hey, I saw this on the news. What is Salesforce, not, the royal Salesforce, what is Salesforce doing to solve it? And somehow, if it impacts infrastructure, it filters back to me or my team in some very bizarre fashion. But there's that accountability where I need to be able to go to my boss and my team, especially if I'm not sure. We're all military background. We've all read, extreme ownership and so forth. But a big chunk of that is knowing when you need to ask for help. So that's a really big one, especially in an infrastructure as vast as ours, with so many different infrastructures and versions and configurations. There's just no physical or logical way to retain it all in one's head. So you've got to ask for help. And for me, I went back to active duty last year for like 5 months. I came back and someone's like, hey, can you scan these hosts for me? I had no idea where they were, like what data center they sat in, where they were in our network. Like, I don't recognize any of these hosts. So they were new hosts built in a new data center, built with a new place. And I eventually had to ask one of the interns actually where it was, because I didn't know. So that is a huge component of it, is that you got to feel very confident. And a big chunk of security is getting confident in knowing that you don't know nearly as much as you think you do, and being able to go to your peers and your boss with what is inevitably bad news. It's bad news. If there's a security vulnerability or a breach, that's not a great conversation to be on a bridge in like the middle of the night. And that happens, again, more often than we'd like to admit, but we're very proactive in solving that. I figured I'd take that one. Thank you.
Yeah, Joseph, great point. I think, I'm a huge fan of W. Edwards Deming and his 14 principles. And one of those was drive out fear, right? So anyone should be able to stand up and say, something's wrong. I need to stop this. And so I think that's great that you instill that and that your team instills that, what, bad news does not get better with time, unfortunately, especially in these circumstances. So great point. Adam, you had a comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I probably want to continue Joseph's kind of line of thinking there. And I think it was Laura's as well. It's everyone's responsibility for security. So security breaches could come in the form of an infrastructure breach, or it could come in the form of me leaving my laptop on a bus and it having customer data on it. So if one person's name, or if customer details of even one person are lost, then that's a breach. So a personal identifying information, first name, last name, email, date of birth, health data as well. So and that's reportable to your local agency, and then your company will be on the front page of the New York Times if you're in America, or something like Channel 7 Nightly News here in Australia. So it's everyone's responsibility. Data is not just sitting on some infrastructure. It's any customer data anywhere.
So that comes up every once in a while. Like, you don't want to be, if you follow the news cycles when it comes to security breaches, it comes in waves. So when a company has one, other companies will suddenly start disclosing it, and you ride the wave. And then what ends up, what I've also seen, it says cybersecurity somewhere in my LinkedIn profile, says for everybody else, is that, oh, who's working security at Salesforce? And it'll filter back to us. But yeah, when there's it's sucky because that's the way it goes. But sometimes when there is an incident of some kind, other companies, two things, will rush to disclose it at the same time. It's like, oh, maybe we'll get lost in the cycle. And then for us, vendors come around. Hey, if you pay us money, we'll tell you how to fix it. So those are the two things that inevitably happen. Thanks.
Carrie, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, you talked about being preventative with this kind of stuff, and so I was just curious if Salesforce has like pen testers essentially, just where their sole job is to try and find out where the gaps are at, within Salesforce, or even with customers or partners, that kind of thing. So, what type of steps besides following governance and everything else, like what type of steps can companies take to prevent these things from happening?
I'll answer the first part of that. So we do have pen testers. We have a red team, and they go out and proactively in our infrastructure and all kinds of pretty awesome tests. And we're able to do that. We also have a product security team. And then we also have, like me, I scan our web applications in GovCloud, with something called Burp Suite, set it up, scan, and then we triage if there's a finding from there. And that's not really pen testing per se, because I'm not going out of my way to exploit it. I'm just triaging it and seeing if it actually is a false positive and is it worth running down. The big thing is pen testing, all that stuff. It's very labor and time intensive. So everybody here, if I told them, hey, I'm going to run a pen test at 2:00 Pacific Standard Time, no, I'm just going to hear, no, please don't run it at 2 a.m. when nobody. So scheduling it is fairly challenging, but also, a lot of companies will not view stuff like that they view it as a cost center, like something that you have to do and you're reluctant. But we don't, we lean into that. But we definitely have people that can pen test here. If Kali Linux, and I can talk to you offline about that, but we definitely have people that do that here and are very proactive in looking for those things. Because again, like we mentioned earlier, we don't want to see us on the news for that.
For people, go ahead, Adam. Sorry.
I was probably just gonna, Joseph back end, Adam front end. I probably just want to go the other side and say, well, Salesforce has that testing on trust.salesforce.com, or is it security.salesforce.com? I think you can get it. You do need to be a customer and get a code, but you can get all those particular tests from the Trust website. As a customer, you're still responsible for penetration testing your own custom application. So if you're writing LWCs and Apex controllers, it's best practice. It is recommended that you still get penetration testing from your local cybersecurity consultancy firm over your custom application, because you can introduce vulnerabilities. Maybe they're public variables that aren't escaped, socket injection, and other. It's called web application testing. So web application testing over custom business process whenever you're using those code-like tools.
Fiona, I will have you add your comment, and then we will pause to get a picture. We're a little bit over halfway point, so I want to make sure I get the picture for everyone.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that I think we've kind of come full circle, and this is why it's a major reason why it's so important that anybody who has any elevated rights in the system or is a change maker, a stakeholder in how the system will be developed, has to have an understanding, because just as it's everyone's responsibility, it means that everybody has the ability to. So, and that again speaks to why we have to have that security in place, because we don't intentionally leave our laptop sitting on a bus. We don't intentionally push the button and delete our coworker's expense report. These are things that happen because we're human, but they're really examples of where data security is critically important. And I think a lot of companies struggle with this idea that data security is not punitive, and it's not creating an environment of lack of trust. Rather, it's creating an environment where we know that we can trust the system to help take care of us, so we can focus on those things that we were hired to do, whether it's developing the expense reports or whatever it may be. So data security really is so much more than just the protection of the data. It really has to do with enabling users to get to where they need to go without the concern of twice as much responsibility than they really need to have. They get to know what they're experts at and let the system handle the rest.
Thank you, Fiona. Okay, so we are a little bit, like I said, past the midpoint of our session. Before I forget, I'd like to get a group photo for sharing on social media. This is important because we always need to be branding. I'll plan to post on LinkedIn and Twitter tomorrow, and we will tag everyone in the photo. If you only have your first name showing in your Google Meet and want to be tagged, please feel free to include your full name in the chat window. It makes it much easier to be able to tag you. For everyone who wants to participate in the photo, please unmute your video, and I'll grab a screenshot. And also, please try not to make any comments during this time, because they will pop up right during the photo. So if you're going to add your name, go ahead and add it real quick while I get the screen enlarged and changed my view to get as many of your faces in this as possible. Okay, so if everyone could pause with names, and then we can resume here in just a minute. I'll give you a countdown. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I think we have most people looking, so we will go with that one. Okay, so this is actually, Fiona, a great segue, I believe, into our next topic, which is going to be DevSecOps. And I think it'll be interesting. I would love to ask you all as well after this first question, DevSecOps and DevOps, same thing, different thing. I think we may have some opinions here on this, maybe a trick question, but now that we're armed with the appreciation of what data security is, I'd like to get into DevSecOps a little bit. So what is it, and how does it help us enable a strong data security foundation?
So I've always viewed that, I'll take it because that's what my team does a lot of that as well, with other teams. So from a security perspective, right, our sensors are baked into the image. So how do you get that entire logistical chain all the way baked in? But it is the continuous deployment and day-to-day operations of security, and it's kind of getting used to doing security, so it's not a punitive or a chore. It's just something you do day to day. So that's where like the daily scanning comes in, the QA checks for everything that goes into production, all that stuff. And that's always, as I feel it out, people on the call that do want to learn more about it, all of the cloud providers that Salesforce partners up with, for everything, has their own kind of idea of that and the training behind it. So AWS is everybody knows, a large partner of ours, has a huge section on what does it mean to do DevOps, all the way through the infrastructure. Yeah.
So Joseph, DevOps and DevSecOps, same thing, different?
Technically, they're different because it goes down to respective product lines and how to execute. But in my head, like the whole holistic thing is just the day-to-day grind of security and getting comfortable doing that every day. Because something as simple as a patching cadence, right? We have major releases, we have major patching we have to do. Some companies don't have that set up yet. So when it comes to patching something, it can be very difficult and challenging just to schedule that time off. Well, we try not to let that go too far and just kick it down the road, because then all of a sudden you have a massive amount of technical debt they have to go back and fix, versus setting it up continuously to do so, to continuously to patch and hold teams accountable for it with SLAs and so forth.
Awesome. Fiona, and then Cece and Adam.
I was totally going to say what Joseph said. He nailed it. It was a wonderful, exact answer. First, I don't think you can do DevOps without DevSecOps. They are theoretically different things, but one directly informs how the other operates. And I think, even at a basic level, having a really defined development lifecycle and ensuring that you have quality assurance, quality QA before you push to production. These are critical aspects of it that should be part of the day-to-day life. A lot of people, particularly in smaller organizations, their administrators will make direct changes to production, which I can understand. It's a rapid change. It seems really small, but without that testing, and again, to Adam's point, without that testing of the actual product itself and what you've developed in the app, you really introduce a lot of problems. So having that really defined, even if it feels bureaucratic and a little bit longer, having that defined DevOps lifecycle prevents a lot of security risks because of DevSecOps, which it has to be built inherently into DevOps.
Thank you. Cece, I wanted to give you a chance. I saw your hand went down, but if you wanted to add something before I jump to Adam.
Oh, yeah, they're saying it perfectly. When I was reviewing the questions for this topic, I was thinking like DevSecOps is DevOps, like if you're doing it right. So, but I also do see why we would want to specifically call out the sec. And I think that's because for those who are involved in DevOps, we typically do tend to put the security later on in the process. Sorry, my Alexa's going off. We do tend to put security, especially at the end of the process, as opposed to the beginning, where I think it should start. And then that's why we have DevSecOps, so that we do that. So I get why it's kind of been broken out, but to me, good DevOps is DevSecOps. So they do go hand in hand.
Awesome. Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur with everything that's been said, and especially Cece. There were 2 security breaches in Australia last year, and both of them were high profile and relating to not production, but that application lifecycle management. So in Salesforce, we talk about ALM, application lifecycle management, and DevOps starts at build and finishes at operate. Okay, so not that design phase. So if you're thinking about DevOps starting at build, who's building? The developers. So Geralyn, I'll try and keep to about 2 minutes on this topic, but I've just popped something in chat there. We had over 3,800 or 3,900 attendees of our March DevOps masterclasses. So we're rerunning them again in Salesforce Days, which actually starts today, I think, Geralyn. Salesforce Days starts today and ends, I think, in November. So in May, if you're interested in more about DevOps, come attend the sessions that myself and Marcelo are running. They are really good sessions. But in regards to security, it is DevOps should be DevSecOps now, because you will get vulnerabilities and breaches in your application lifecycle management. So that starts with secured coding, okay? Sandboxes which contain prod data we talked about. What about preventative measures such as data masking, PII data in sandboxes? So Salesforce has data mask. There are many other tools out in the ecosystem that also mask data as well. Removing prod secrets from sandboxes. Maybe they're in custom settings if they're older sandboxes. Older orgs. Newer orgs should be using named credentials. But even removing the prod certificates, updating remote site settings to localhost to stop sandboxes from talking to production when they're created. I even go as far as updating named credentials to no authentication, just to kind of get out those prod credentials. So there's a monitoring strategy. So that is cybersecurity related monitoring of baselining, users exporting reports, threat detection, all the way through to your testing of, we talked about web application penetration testing. But there's also other things you need to work with Salesforce, like Salesforce release updates. You've got the critical updates. I think they're called, or they were called critical updates. They're now called release updates. And proactive measures like running, regularly running your health check and your security health checks and other health checks, tools that Salesforce give you just to, make sure that your organ is nice and clean and free from vulnerabilities.
Awesome. So just a little bit further on that subject, are there some tools that our Trailblazers should be aware of that they can use to enable DevSecOps during the implementation process?
Specifically, I guess I can go. So I think backup and restore is a really important tool anyway. You're going to back up your data. But when you back up your data, like Joseph said, you've still got to trust where that data is going. So there are some great tools on the App Exchange, such as Odeceiver and Own Backup, which actually do have compliance like IRAP and FedRAMP, even for those government customers in America. Monitoring. So if you've got Salesforce Shield, you'll have event monitoring. That is so important for near real-time monitoring of your users and insights. So you can look at multiple logins based on geolocation from different geolocations, how much a user is downloading or exporting, exporting reports. You can export your whole customer base and just shove off. So not only am I exporting a report, but am I doing anything outside my normal? So baselining my normal usage, and anything outside that baselining might get picked up, and that can be automatically put through to the cybersecurity team to then go investigate that particular incident. So static code analysis, if we're talking about secure coding for Salesforce ecosystem folk, the static code analyzer or code scan as a ISV product or check marks, running a scan over the files at rest, the Apex, the LWC JavaScripts, just to make sure you haven't got any vulnerability or security type violations in there. Joseph, can you think of any more?
So I don't personally focus on tooling all that much. I focus on process and the good practices. There's a laundry list. If everybody on the call, goes back to that best practice page. I think somebody just posted in the chat. It actually covers a big chunk of that. So understanding your own company's processes, how they do things, is probably more important than the tooling itself. So I came to Salesforce. We have a vendor. I never really used them before, but we're like homies for life with these guys because they are everywhere in Salesforce. We use the tool every single day. So I knew the process, and I just went back and figured out how the tooling works and all the quirks. And then now if I have like something I want done, or more realistically, we go to them because a vulnerability came out. We now need to scan for it. We go back to them. So everybody on the call, understanding your own company's internal processes. And if you don't have one and it's a problem, are you going to own it or not is something to consider. If the tooling is, because a tool won't solve your problem if you haven't figured out your own processes yet. Over.
Fiona.
I just wanted to kind of add to Joseph's comment, which is that, for example, if you have a government customer, or you work for a government organization, the tools you use in one organization may not be the same ones you use for the next one. Many different customers, different agencies, even different offices have different development tools and different processes that they go through for various number of reasons. whether they're business or security or what it might be. So to his point, make sure you know what your customer's explicit process is, what you're supposed to follow, how do you do hot fixes, what are the software tools they need at what point, how does licensing work, because they vary quite frequently. And it's important to be following those.
So a real life example of that is for our FedRAMP customers is that we were using a tool and it was for FedRAMP High, and the customer kind of in the middle of when we were setting this up is like, no, we don't want that tool in our system. So we had to like run back and like pick another tool, and I like slapped something together and got it working because we still have to, follow that timeline. But that's very true. So if you are meeting an audit requirement and that customer might be particular or they might only accept certain tools, you gotta check that, because that'll be one of those really bizarre surprises when you're getting sign off that could come up and give you a surprise. And Adam, you actually got me thinking about another thing when it comes to the secure development. If you do, I talked about, we talked about the security practices and so forth and the amount of infrastructure that we have. If we have a security vulnerability, like let's say in our microservices, we're using containerized apps and so forth. If one container is bad, that's hundreds of thousands of containers that could potentially be bad and baked into it. So, we try to do QA. And a lot of people on the call, it's very simple to check containers. If you look at like there we go. I have Astro on the back of my phone case. If you look at like your production line and your testing environment, you're just picking containers off the assembly line and doing a QA check and then setting it back down. But regardless, if it's in one environment, like if I know the security vulnerability in commercial cloud or marketing cloud, there's a good chance it could be in Gov Cloud unless it's Microsoft Windows, which doesn't exist in Gov Cloud here. But a lot of other stuff it could be. Thanks. River.
Akib, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Before, thank you so much to all the panelists for being here. This was a very good session. I wish it was longer, but so much covered in small session. Quickly, Cece, I'm a big fan of you. I follow on Twitter, so really great to see you here. LeeAnne, I love your YouTube content as well. And Joseph, I wanted to give a quick shout out for sharing those stressful moments. I think we as admins in-house don't really appreciate how much data security happens on the back end. We go to sleep at night very happily and knowing that in the morning time, the data will be secured. So for that, we appreciate all the work that your team does, all the stress that y'all put in to make sure our data in-house is safe. So one question I did have was, so first one was what Fiona said, like sometimes data security is just not how data is stored, but how the end users access it. So for me, like Salesforce retiring permissions on profiles was the biggest thing for me, because that was such a pain, because that's where all those technical debt happen with sharing objects, sharing rules that happens. And then one other thing I want to talk about is like data loader, right? When you think about data security within your org, data loader is something that's very dangerous. You can do so much with data loader. You can delete thousands of records. You can update thousands of records. That's not accurate. For my org and for our orgs I've worked on before, data loader has been something that's been used widely by end users, not just admins. And I work mostly in the health cloud space, so PHI, protected health information space. So I would love to hear about the processes that can be implemented to make sure that, data loader, which is something that's very easy to use, but can be so harmful if not used correctly, what processes can be built in place for it. Thank you.
We're going to run out of time on that one to answer that question. There's no end on that. But I think Adam, I feel like you use that like a lot.
Yeah.
If I remember.
Yeah, I want to probably just point out and I'm just gonna. We only have 3 minutes left. Geralyn and Joseph, maybe I'm just gonna point out tools that sit on your computer and tools that sit in the cloud. So, for instance, in Australia we have, and you probably have regulations too in financial services or FedRAMP, where you're not allowed to store or transmit data outside your region. Okay. And so if you're using data loader, that's sitting on your computer, you're probably sitting in your region. So cybersecurity team will go, okay, that's fine. You've got customer data sitting on your computer, and you're going to connect to your Salesforce instance, Hyperforce usually sitting on your region now. So you're not going to have data being stored or transmitted going outside the region, and you're going to comply with regulation. But if you're using something like Workbench Cloud in Australia, that's outside our region. So therefore, that I would be breaking our government or I'm going to say financial services regulation if I was in a bank by using public by transmitting data out to Workbench Cloud, because that's going outside the region of Australia. So I would, if it's something sitting on your computer and you're connecting straight to your Salesforce org, you generally will be fine as far as your regulations. But if you're using cloud, always get your cybersecurity team to say, hey, can we use this application? I mean, usually you should get your cybersecurity team to authorize applications on your work computer. Usually it's locked down, so they will do that. But don't forget the cloud applications, because that data is being transmitted, even if they don't store it. It's being transmitted outside a region. That's going to probably break some regulations in certain industries.
It's all fun and game until somebody says, hey, can you please step away from the computer?
Taps you on the shoulder.
You're talking about the red team, Joseph?
Yeah, the red team.
To add to that, just kind of jumping in, another thing, if you're concerned about someone using data loader to do things they shouldn't be, that's where permissions would come in. So you would make sure that things are locked down in the org so that they don't even have that ability to log in and, export everything or do things like that. So after we've made sure you're even allowed to use it, you'd want to review the users and what permissions and access they have. And then you can lock it down from there in that respect.
Awesome. I know we are just at time, so maybe, David, a session 2 for this one, because we had a lot of great questions that I think we were not able to get to. But before we close, I'd like to thank Cece, Joseph, Adam, Chris, Fiona, Laura, and LeeAnne for co-hosting tonight's session with me. It's been awesome having you here and getting your perspectives on the topics we discussed. So thank you all so much for spending your Wednesday evening with us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Or Adam, thanks for spending your Wednesday morning with us. Or Thursday morning. Thursday morning? Thursday morning.
See you, folks.
Thanks
you all. Everybody. Bye-bye.